Hey Glass, back to the guest book. I've got myself a basic form here that I can submit. PHP can detect that the form was submitted. I've got a hard-coded guestbook message from, Brennan. What I'd like to do now is to create a database table in MySQL. And in that, I want to keep all my guestbook messages so that anybody can come visit my site, leave a message, and it'll be listed underneath for everybody else to see. That's what you can do with the database. So to work with the database, I need to create a table. Create table. You can't see that, can you? That's more like it. Create table. Let's call it guestbook. And I'd like my guestbook to hold the name of the message author. That will be some kind of a text. I'd also like it to hold the message itself. That too should be some kind of text. And I'd want this to be stored as UTF-8 character set because that's what I'm using on my site. Now, tables should invariably have a primary key, a column that uniquely identifies one row. I could call this, I don't know, guestbook ID. It should be a number, an integer, a non-decimal number, and it must be there, so the field should be not null. And I'd like it to auto increment, which really means that the first row inserted into this table will get a default number 1, and the second row will get a default number of 2 because it auto increments. The next row again will get a default number of 3, and so on and so forth. So each one row has a unique ID number, kind of like a CPR number except for guestbook messages. Auto-incrementing columns, they must be declared as primary key. And primary key. And that's just a MySQL concept, or an SQL concept, for saying this column is what uniquely identifies one row. So the unique identifier is a primary key. I'll note here that guestbook ID is the primary key of this table. Where's my go button? There. Okay. With my guestbook table created, it's still completely empty, but at least it's there. So what I'd like to do is whenever some user types in stuff in my form, I'd like that to be inserted into the table. From my index, let's just take a look at that. From my index, I have, you can't see that, I have a variable db, $db, that holds a PDO object. And that's my connection to my database. It connects to a MySQL host with the name localhost, and the database name it connects to is called recipe site spring 14. My user name is root and my password is an empty string. That's because I'm working on an XAMPP localhost. So there we are. My password and username is completely exposed. Anyway, what I'd like you to see is that I've got $db. I've got this variable holding an object, and that through that I can connect to a database. This line of code will load guestbook.php whenever the guestbook navigation item was clicked. And because this line of code happens after I've declared the $db, I know that $db will be available inside here. So I can simply, whenever the guestbook form is submitted, I can go and insert a message and send along $db, so I have a database connection. That's red. So insert message is a function I'd like to create. Function insert message, and it takes an argument $db, and I'd like that. It should take some more. Database connection, it should also take the $username and the $message. So I'm going to send a database connection, the username from the form and the message from the form to the function insert message. And that function, when it's declared, should receive 3 parameters. I don't have to call them exactly the same names, that doesn't really matter, but I need 3 arguments because it's called with 3 arguments. I'm just going to call them the same thing, that's easy enough to work with. To communicate with the database, I need SQL, and I want to insert into my table called guestbook, and I want to insert into the columns called author and message. I think that's what I called it. Let me just check. Structure, author and message. I don't want to insert into guestbook ID because that's auto-incrementing. That will take care of itself. I just want to supply the author name and the message that author wrote. So insert into guestbook, author and message. The values to insert should be for author, I'd want the username, and for message, I'd want the message from the form. So the username from the form will be inserted into the author column and the message into the message column. And it will be like that because I list author first and list the value username first. So the order of columns and values correspond. Author first, message next. Author first, message next. So there's my SQL. I want PHP to run this SQL. And in order to do that with PDO, which is what I've got in my database object here, I need to create a PDO statement object. And I can do that through the PDO object itself. So $db prepare the SQL. The method prepare is a PDO method, and it will create and return a PDO statement object. And the PDO statement object can execute the SQL statement. So that really should insert a new message. Let's try. Back to browser. I hope I saved. Refresh my page, and Thomas wrote great. Post. I see nothing here. This is not database driven content. So to check if my code works, I need to check my database. I can't see anything here. This is not database driven content. But if my script works, it should have inserted a row into, there we are, into my database table. There is Thomas saying great. And this row of data got the default guestbook ID number of 1. Let's just check. Brennan wrote hello, and browse again. So Thomas wrote great, and then Brennan wrote hello. So the second row gets a guestbook ID of 2 because this column is auto-incrementing. That's a unique ID, identifying one single row. That's great. What I'd like now is that instead of showing this hard-coded guestbook message, I'd like to show what's in the database. I need to update my script a bit. So to get guestbook data, I shouldn't be getting back a hard-coded standard class object. Nope. So that's not what I want to return, and I don't really want to make this at all. Rather, I'd want to repeat pretty much the same procedure. I want to create an SQL statement, but it shouldn't insert. It should instead select data from the database. And it should select the so select author, guestbook, author, message from guestbook. So it should select all authors and their messages from my guestbook. And once again, I want to make a statement, PDO statement object, and to do that I need my PDO object. I don't have that available here now, but I can easily get it by setting an argument that will receive it, and when it's called, I pass along the $db PDO object created an index. There we are. I can execute that, and what I want to return is the entire PDO statement object. And then this will not be one message, it'll be more like message data. See, now that I've got message data, I have a problem in my view, because my view looks for one message. If I refresh, I get all these undefined variable. What is that? Well, it's my guestbook message html.php saying I don't have a variable one message, and it's not an object, the variable I don't have, and it doesn't have a property username, nor does it have a property message. I need to change my code. Messages output should be something. So what I want really, message data, to get one row of data from my database, I can take my PDO statement object and call the method fetch object. Return messages output. So I can fetch object, call the method fetch object, and that should return a standard class object. Let's just try that. Let's call it one message equals that. Save and take a look. And someone wrote great. Undefined property username in line 7. Oh, that's because it's not called username. I called it author and message. So not username, but author and message. There we are. Thomas wrote great. That's my single row of data. Now I happen to know that I've got 2 rows of data. Brennan also wrote something. So I can overwrite the one message variable by calling fetch object again. And the second time I call fetch object, it'll grab the second row from my database. And then I can concatenate, that is, add Brennan's message to my message. So first I fetch object to get my message, and then I fetch object to get Brennan's message. Let's see it. There we are. Thomas wrote great, Brennan wrote hello. However, in a guestbook I can't really know how many messages I've got. I can't have a script that statically assumes, oh, there are 2 rows in the database, no more, no less. That's not at all intelligent. I'd like my script to return however many messages that can be found in the database table. If it's 1, show 1 row, or show 1 message. If there are no messages, don't show anything. If there are 10 messages, show 10. I can do that with a while loop. And to use a while loop, I'll do that next. I can simply wrap all of this into one code block belonging to a while loop. So a while loop will continue, it will loop, it will iterate, it will do this again and again and again for as long as this expression is true. And this expression will be true for as long as there are new rows to be fetched from the database. Let's try it. So I expect it to loop 2 times. But I only see Brennan's message. And that's because whenever the while loop runs, the message's output will be overridden. It will be redeclared to hold the latest message. So to avoid that, I start by creating the variable messages output to hold an empty string, just nothing. And for every 1 iteration of the while loop, I want to concatenate that row's data to the messages output, which will in the end be returned. Let's try that. I expect to see both messages. And if I add one, Frederikke wrote, where are the recipes anyway? And there is Frederikke's message. This could be styled much nicer with a tiny bit of CSS. Just a few lines of CSS would make this a lot prettier. But at least it's a form, and PHP responds when the form is submitted, and the content is database driven, and any form submission will insert form data into a database table called guestbook. That's pretty cool. It's almost Facebook. Thanks for watching.